Hello, I am Joel McLeod.
I'm Roland Tanner.
And welcome to the 905er. It looks like the tide is starting to turn. The Ontario government has announced that on July 16th, large portions of the restrictions placed on businesses due to the pandemic will finally be lifted. While we are starting to look to the future of a COVID-19 in our past, we thought it might be time to take a look back as well. Our fifth episode of this podcast was with Jason Cassis. Jason is the owner and the founder of Equal Parts Hospitality, which includes the Aberdeen Tavern and Knollwood Golf Course, both located in Hamilton. At the time, Jason was optimistic of the fact that we'd get through this pandemic, and we wanted to talk with him and see if he wanted to reevaluate that assertion. As well, we wanted to know what the state of the industry in Hamilton, as well as the rest of Ontario, would be like after a year of the pandemic. We wanted to know how he thought the government handled the pandemic to date and what challenges lie ahead for the industry to get back on its feet. As well, what should the public expect going forward? Now, before we begin the interview, we'd like to encourage you to become a 905er yourself by joining our Patreon. For only $7 per month, you'll be helping to tell the great stories of the 905. Please click on the link in the show notes to join today. And now, on with the show. Well, I'd like to thank Jason Cassis for coming back almost 1 year later, we could say, to the 905er podcast. Jason, you were on episode 5, one of the very first guests that we had on the podcast. And I'm just gonna say, since that time, can you give us a summary of how the pandemic has affected your operation so far?
Well, that's a heck of a place to start. It has affected absolutely every aspect of every operating company we own. If you're an event space, you've been decimated because you can't hold events. If you are a restaurant business, you've had to use the term truly pivot multiple times over a year and a half. If you are a golf course, you have had, great business, and then we were shut down by the government and then reopened by the government. It was just an emotional roller coaster. We opened a small hotel type product in the midst of the pandemic that surprisingly went well. So I would say generally it's been difficult as anything I've ever imagined navigating through. I'm incredibly fortunate to have a very strong business partner at the restaurant group and a very strong business partner at the golf club and a very strong set of partners in the hotel company that we all relied on one another to get through this. And then ultimately the staff, I think, the employees, the lifeblood of the organization, they were the ones who really, really kept us going, kept us focused, kept us, wanting to do better through this thing or survive it, really.
When we first chatted, this was kind of when the pandemic was first in its infancy. The restrictions we're just kind of getting used to the idea of, masking and the word pivot and whatnot. And that was the early summer or midsummer of 2020. You seemed optimistic that we were going to weather the changes, we're going to weather this pandemic, and we're going to come out of it. Do you still think that assessment was accurate, having gone through a year of COVID-19?
It would be the first time I've been wrong. So let's say that maybe I was half right and half wrong in that thinking, and I'll explain that. I think the half right is that, we had a very accommodative federal government, and I cannot give them enough credit. Perhaps they overstepped, in retrospect a little bit, but who knew? How do you know what's an overstep? How do you know what's an understep, right? So I think they did really well. I think the province, could have done a better job ultimately than what they did to keep pushing things forward. And then ultimately the regional government. I think our public health department did a really good job of keeping things in check. I think their big challenge now to again, that this too will pass and getting back to normal. It's really going to be up to public health to really help vaccinate those in the more difficult postal codes that have low vaccination rates. Those are my thoughts there.
The reason why we wanted to have you on this episode was because the Ontario government announced that on July 16th, this seems that a lot of those restrictions are finally going to be lifted, such as indoor dining is going to be allowed to resume under some public health guidelines, social distancing guidelines, et cetera. But I mean, that was a big thing that I know the restaurant and hospitality industry wanted to see come back. We've heard in the media, not necessarily your operation, but the industry is having some difficulty getting back on its feet, getting, the idea of getting employees to come back after a year off. Some employees have gone off to go back to school, found other careers, et cetera, et cetera. Can you tell us, like, how prepared is the industry to return back to normal? Like, what are some of the difficulties that you're seeing, not just with you guys, but maybe in other people in the industry? Just now that things are getting back, like, what are some of the difficulties that you're facing?
Well, the industry is not prepared at all, in my opinion, to reopen full steam ahead this Friday. And keep in mind that despite how it seems or how it looks, we're still throttled back significantly on indoor dining. You're still talking about 2-meter separation. So if you're a small restaurant, you're still at less than 50% capacity, right? Which really hurts. It's a tough decision to reopen in that kind of environment. If you're a big restaurant, say like the Diplomat, it's better. We can fit lots of people in the Diplomat at 2-meter spacing. So, larger restaurants, unfortunately, are going to do better just by virtue of space than smaller ones, certainly for 3 weeks. Insofar as HR is concerned, I don't are you guys hiding all of the restaurant employees in your basements or something? Like, I have no idea where everyone is gone. Whether some people are just reluctant to come back to work. We talked about this, maybe it's a bit of the 20%. It's like the 20% of unvaccinated people. Like, are they really anti-vaxxers, or are they just nervous or concerned? Maybe some people aren't leaving their house. Maybe you have some of that as well. So I don't know. How does it affect us? I think is the question. And the effect is, we'd love to open 7 days a week, lunch and dinner and brunch. And the truth is, we just don't have enough people to do that coming out of the gate. I hope to get back to that for fall or sooner, but right now it doesn't look that way.
So right now there's just a shortage of staff is the major challenge that you're kind of facing, even with the restricted numbers.
Yes, and it's not just hospitality staff. You're talking about retail staff. It's not just the industries that were most affected, oddly enough. It seems to be people looking for people everywhere. So again, I don't know if we undercount the number of people who are still nervous, pandemically speaking, who, if they had an option to collect EI, would continue to stay on EI, not for the wrong reasons. I mean, there's always going to be a few of those people, don't get me wrong, but for the right reasons, where, their mental health is at stake. Maybe they need they need a lift through this to get back on their feet. Maybe they need to see zero COVID in their minds, so to speak.
And you wonder if it's also about, because we had some false dawns along the way. It's like, well, yeah, I'll go back when I know this is for good and I can use it to pay for an apartment or whatever. I don't want to go back and then 2 weeks later I'm back to it. I guess it's that ability to kind of predict the future, maybe, that we're still lacking. Yeah, that's really interesting.
Yeah, they would be prudent given what's happened to the restaurant. I mean, if you're talking about in a restaurant, let's say you're a cook. Let's say you're a $20 an hour cook making $20 an hour cooking on a line, at a hotel or at a golf course or at a restaurant or somewhere. And you can make close to that at home, right? Or you have the option to offset that by moving back home. well, why would you leave that safe environment or that safe, financial security, so to speak, for something you might lose again and may not be able to get back?
Mm-hmm.
Because there are some really interesting labor law issues that surround this as well.
Right.
If you refuse to come back to work, you've effectively, terminated yourself. There's some crazy laws out there right now.
Well, on that note, I mean, we followed you on social media over the past year, and I've noticed that you have been somewhat critical of the provincial government in how the restrictions and just the kind of course that they've charted on handling the economy and the pandemic. And I want to ask you, just based on the criticism that you've seen or that you've handed out to the provincial government, how confident are you in this government being able to safely and effectively reopen the economy?
I, what I believe in is I believe that, as has been proven, there is some seasonality to this, only because of the fact that we all get outside in the summer, right? So I'm not saying the virus is seasonal, I'm saying we're seasonal, right? So we get outside, we're less inside, we're less likely to spread a virus. So COVID is going to go away like it is right now, and it'll probably return in the fall again. And how the government implements its COVID is back plan, now what are we going to do? They're going to be in an extremely precarious situation because the feds will have pulled back on subsidy and should, to some degree, with the exception of sectors that are highly affected sectors. But it'll be the province that makes the decision as to whether you become insolvent or not, and therefore lose your job because your company went broke. So my confidence level in the provincial government right now, based on how they handled the pandemic, is fairly low. I hope that they learned from the first go around that shutting off an entire economy altogether is a bad idea.
Mm-hmm.
Those are my thoughts.
It seemed to me that their intentions were good, and their intentions were very often to help business and to help restaurants in particular. But what they did was actually had the reverse effect to what they were trying to get, and that they opened too soon and too readily, and then we had to close down again. Is that how you perceived it? Because I know we've spoken to some restaurateurs or who I felt had a different feeling, or were more like just open up and just deal with it. Whereas, it just seemed to me that they were doing the worst thing in terms of what you needed by rushing things.
Yeah, and stop-start is the worst.
Right.
Like to ramp up and to ramp down. An accounting firm moves home from their office, plugs in, sets up a home office, and starts. And they don't have to ramp up and ramp down. They do it once, whereas we have to do it every time. It's so expensive to do that. Training, menus, food costing, there's so many things. Not to mention right now, commodities that we purchase, dairy, meat, all these different things have really,
Well, I remember that back in March, was it, with at the start of the third wave, the province came out and said, okay, restaurants reopen. And I know there are a lot of you guys that went out and you bought a ton of inventory because you were told, yeah, Friday we're, you're going at it full throttle. Yay, way to go. And then like the next week you were told, no, guess what? We gotta close you back down. That kind of stuff must shake your confidence, and just, it is okay for me to pick up the phone and place in an inventory order to my supplier. How does that make you feel as the owner, as an entrepreneur, just like to say, okay, I can start making plans again, when that was the big reaction in the past?
Yeah, it was tough. That coincided virtually with the closure of golf courses and playgrounds and everything else. Mm-hmm. So, I apologize in advance for what you read on Twitter. I lost it, let me tell you, because I thought how can they do this? Do they, what information are they getting that we're not getting?
Right.
When we're watching other countries that are 2 to 3 to 4 to 6 weeks ahead or behind of us, and we can study them perfectly and know exactly what works and what doesn't work. And why is it that they arrive at these decisions? And the only answer is it has to be political. And that's what pissed me off.
Were you ever consulted, or did you know of anyone in your industry, like an owner such as yourself, that was consulted by your MPP or any ministers to say, what do you need, or where are you at? Were you ever consulted, or anyone in the restaurant industry by the provincial government?
We have, similar to other industries, we have lobby groups, right? Like we have restaurant associations. We have, I'm sure there's probably a nightclub association. There's all these different associations. So we did our best through those associations. Some things became very clear in the pandemic. Things like the unfair pricing at the LCBO. That's a mind-boggling one to me. If one thing comes out of this, it should be that restaurants, like every other business in the world, should be able to buy a wholesale product from a wholesaler. And if you're going to treat your retailer and your wholesaler as the same person, you're truly not doing a service to your businesses in your province. And so the one thing they could do is they could throttle back the markup of 71% on wine, as an example. That would help a bit. Those are some of the things they can do, is actually dig into some of their policy. City of Hamilton, like Jason Thorne, Jason Farr, Mayor Eisenberger, when they stepped up for the patio thing, like that was just great. I mean, we were literally leading Canada in that regard. I was very proud of our councillors and our mayor at that point. Well, the same thing can continue to happen with public space. When you look at policy, what can we do to make the recovery inexpensive? Why is a business license, I don't know, $500? Why couldn't it be $400? Let's help these people out for a year or two. It doesn't have to be a gift. It doesn't have to be tack it onto the property taxes in 2 years.
Right.
If property taxes at, I don't know, let's pick one. The French are $20,000 a year as an example, right? Well, make them $15,000 a year, tack $5,000 2 years in a row back on over a decade. Get your money back, plus charge maybe 2 or 3% interest on that property, would be a hell of a way that, Mayor Eisenberger and Councillor Farr, as an example, could table something that would really help. And that's meaningful, let me tell you. Where the province falls down is, or where they could step up, I shouldn't say falls down, where they could step up is to do similar things in the things that they control, such as the LCBO.
Because it seems that the way I've interpreted it, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, is that, and you've been fairly flattering in many ways to all three levels of government, and you're definitely not coming from a party perspective. You're giving your honest feeling, and you've been critical where criticism has been needed, and fair where fairness. So it's good to hear those positive things, because it's so easy in what we do to always harp on the negative. However, I mean, I felt that, and kind of what you're saying is, the federal government did a good job, and kind of what the federal government could do was write checks, and by and large, with this, that's their job, and they did it. They wrote checks.
Yeah.
And the province had a much tougher job, and then it too could write checks if it wanted to, but they didn't. But whether we're trying to, it certainly seemed to me that they were trying to avoid writing checks.
They wrote a few, but whether you got them or not is the question. Whether you qualified.
Right. Yeah. So it was so easy for the various things that the federal government brought in that came in quickly, and it was like, you get it, everybody gets it, kind of thing. You mentioned the LCBO. That's a really good point. The kind of these are legislative changes that could be made. It costs kind of nothing up front. I mean, What else should the province have been doing, do you think? And I'm not wanting to single them out for criticism or anything, but I do feel that maybe they've been the least imaginative in how they've dealt with the challenges, maybe. So, in addition to the LCBO, what other things do you think they should have been looking at?
Well, let me say this. They had the hardest job, right? So I'll give them that. My gosh, they're the ones who had to make up the rules that ended up in bylaw in all of our cities, right? That's kind of like damned if you do, damned if you don't kind of job, right? You're going to get criticized. And we all did. And some of us hated it and some of us loved it. What can they do going forward now is they can eliminate red tape in every way, shape, or form. And I'm not talking about MZOs for developers and things like that. That is not going to help a local restaurant. That is not going to help Johnny who owns a shoe store or Sally who owns a bakery, right? That is not going to move their needle. What we need is a true grassroots approach to help. I think a lot of it can be done regionally through tourism associations. I think a lot could be done through local BIAs. BIAs are probably the most underappreciated, underfunded thing that we have going for small business in the province. The amount of work that they do relative to the size of budget that they have is remarkable. So for the province to finally recognize a mechanism or a way to fund these, these little agencies throughout cities throughout the province would be a huge step forward to directly helping small business. Without our association downtown BIA, we would never have been able to light up King William the way we did.
I was going to say, I want to touch base on a point that you made a little while back about employees kind of being scared to come back into the workplace. Because I would argue that fear of coming back into restaurants and hospitality industry centers isn't just for employees. I think there's a bit of a trepidation in the public at large. I know for a fact, like speaking with my wife, there's after a year of kind of avoiding going into restaurants to all of a sudden say, okay, now we can go back in. I mean, it's a big change for some people. I know that there's many people who are itching to go back. And the minute July 16th, I'm sure you're going to have a lineup at your doors, and that's good for you guys. But how do you reach out to the other portion of the public that used to go out to eat and drink, but are now kind of conditioned to second guess that impulse? And I'm wondering how does the industry overcome that to not just instill confidence in your brand, but kind of the concept of dining out again?
Well, that is a challenge. That is a challenge right now for a couple of reasons. You have a statistical challenge right now. Right now, in the city of Hamilton, as an example, which looks very much like every other city in the province, less than 20% of the workforce has returned to the towers. Well, that's lunch, period.
Right.
That's your entire lunch crowd, right? So all the suits are missing. 80% of the suits are missing, right? And they're the spenders at lunch. 80% of the people who might join a suit, hey, meet me after work. Hey, let's meet me for lunch. To their son or to their wife or their husband or their partner or whatever, they're not coming because they're not there to invite them, right? Your birthday celebration at the office, your retirement party at the office is missing because 80% of you are missing. All of that is missing. So it is a huge issue, which will only come with the exit of the pandemic, and that's going to take some time for the recovery. Now, New York City, I've been very closely watching New York City because it's a canary in the coal mine. And so far, they are getting now north of 20% of people returning to the office. It's robust again. Tourism has started to recover, things like that. So when you start getting Pearl Jam concerts again, and when you start to get those things, that's what will feel good. About dining downtown and getting back into the restaurants. Like, well, we've gone to the concert with 30,000 people. We should probably go out for dinner, right? So there's that side of it. The other side of it is, there's a thawing out period like you wouldn't believe. We noticed it when patios open. People were not climbing all over themselves to go to a patio. They warmed up eventually, and now it rained. Now it's just constantly raining. It's
Right.
we can't get it right this year with the reopen. Let me tell you, between the government and the weather.
That's true. It was the weather was good last year, and it's been kind of. I mean, yeah, I haven't been on a patio yet. I have to admit, I have been to a restaurant once in the last year, and it was during indoor dining, and it was that's the one time I've been inside somewhere, which is a very strange experience, and I felt guilty while I was doing it, even though I was abiding by all the rules that were in place in that time. So it is kind of it is a challenge, much as I certainly have been sort of craving that social interaction of going out with friends and having like it used to be. There's still a kind of mental block somewhat there that I admit I'm kind of feeling. I don't trust those vaccinations yet, and I mean I do trust them completely. I don't want to give the wrong impression, but it's an interesting kind of mental exercise that I think we're all kind of going through, which is a barrier for you that you need to overcome. Now, you mentioned a couple of things. I mean, two of the things, or the thing about you that certainly has been very impressive is the sort of innovation that you've done during the course of this year. That these challenges have come along, and at no point have you kind of said, "Well, we're just going to sit this out and hope that we're still here when it finishes." I mean, you were. Before the phrase "ghost kitchen" even existed, we were speaking to you because you were experimenting with this concept of using kitchens to cook restaurant food for takeout, and then you also mentioned an experiment with a hotel, which is astonishingly, because it's like, well, no one's traveling right now. What made you think you could start a hotel? So first of all, how did the ghost kitchen sort of concept go? And do you think, is that something that's going to survive the pandemic or just go away naturally?
No, I think that goes away.
Right.
Our experience was, it was great when you were terrified and you wouldn't leave your house. And you were so sick of your own food that you wanted to eat restaurant quality food. You didn't really want to pay restaurant prices. So there's an option, right?
Yeah, it was something.
Mama Rosa was a hit, and then we shut it because as soon as patios opened or dining reopened, it died very quickly. Right? It went from X number of sales per day down to nothing. So we think, well, we'll shut it until everyone gets shut back in again, and so that's what we did. I don't think that. I mean, it can survive. That can happen. I think more like meal type of convenience delivery will happen more than restaurant food being delivered from a ghost kitchen. You'll still have a bit of that. The hotel is definitely a success story. We're in the midst of a capital raise right now, and we're going to be opening 6 locations throughout Ontario. So It has absolutely blossomed. It's made in Hamilton. First location in Waterloo. It's called the Laundry Rooms. And laundryrooms.ca and the laundryrooms.ca. And it's done really well. We're about to launch something really interesting as well, because part of our model is to do capital light and diversify away from restaurant and event spaces and golf courses. We're launching something called Winebox. So shop at winebox.ca. We're trying to take all of the small lot farms and farmers around the world and give them a platform to sell their wine on and be delivered to Ontarians that would never touch the retail floor of the LCBO. So all the great $17 Chiantis that you've tasted probably, wine by the glass at a restaurant that you probably paid $12 a glass for, we'd like to sell direct to consumer. So that that $17 bottle of Chianti is our innovative way of helping out the small guy and girl in the, through the pandemic by putting all of these small lot farms in one website and then distributing it.
Is that like Ontario centric wineries or like,
global?
Global. Okay.
It's global. So we've got a bunch of wine agencies looking for really interesting and unique small lot farms, 50 acres and under type places, places that have really unique stories or burdens that were burdened in during COVID, or still are burdened during COVID. Again, things that the LCBO could never touch because they have too many stores.
This is something you're allowed to do. I mean, this is my profound ignorance of the whole industry here. But you can do this. I wouldn't have thought you could.
Well, if you're a wine importer, you can do it, right? So if you work with wine importers and then you're able to deliver wines, and you have restaurants, it's the perfect storm of being able to. It's technically not competing with the LCBO in the sense that it's it flies under the radar of what would be. You're not opening a retail shop, if you will.
See, that's something that I'm excited to see kind of carry on post-COVID, because I'll be honest, I don't miss going into stores to browse. I just I've never liked it. I just like being like, I want this, click, deliver to my door. And that was the one thing I liked. I've always wondered, like, why doesn't the LCBO get in on this? We see in the States, there's so many, wine subscription services, and, the wine online wine ordering that, you click and you fill out your profile and what your taste selection is like, and they curate different, like, these smaller known wineries to you. And I was like, why can't we get that in Canada? And I always assumed it was some bureaucratic.
What is it about a monopoly that makes them slow to innovate?
Exactly, yeah. What is it about a dictatorship that removes everyone's freedom? I don't know.
Well, that was the thing. I was like, why? I would love to, and you could throw on. I don't know. Why does the LCBO do that? You could throw on some Ontario, some of the smaller Niagara Peninsula wineries, and throw that on. So I'd be curious to see how that works.
It's coming. It's coming, and it's not coming to the LCBO. It's coming to independence. That's one thing that I can count on this government for, it would appear, and that's alcohol reform in the province of Ontario. It's not reforming fast enough, but hopefully the pandemic gives it a push.
On that note, like, what, everybody's talking about this return to normal, and I'm like, kind of normal is what got us here. Do we really want to go back that way? But I'm wondering, as the hospitality industry, like, is that a reality? Are we expecting to go back to the way things were prior to March 2020, or are you guys preparing for a kind of providing a new experience going forward?
My fear about that statement is that it actually returns to something that looks like the 80s. Do you remember in Ferris Bueller's Day Off, when they walked into the fancy restaurant and they had the maitre d' and the guy was a dick, right?
Yes.
Right? That guy?
Yeah.
I feel like, economically speaking, rents, labor costs, food costs, everything else, we're going to get this divergence between super high-end restaurants and then basically to-go joints. And that wonderful in-between that we've had might disappear to some degree, which was a lot of what happened in the 80s. Remember in the 80s, or maybe in your case, the 90s, you go out to dinner with your parents and you either went to a down and dirty kind of place and ate some fried chicken or a fish fry or something like that, fish and chips, or you had to sit upright and don't play with your radio and put your Walkman away. Right?
I remember that, and it was Walkman. Wow, you really dated me there. But I remember, growing up, you kind of had your fast food joints, like your McDonald's, Burger Kings, and whatnot. Then you had your chain restaurants, and the big one was always like, your Eastside Mario's or Swiss Chalet. And then you had like kind of your niche 5-star high end. You wore your suit and tie to go to those restaurants. And you're right. I don't, the kind of idea, the entrepreneur who says, no, I want to make my food my way, and I don't want the stuffiness, but I don't want to be just pouring stuff out of a jar onto a plate either.
I'm afraid that market leaves. That's my concern.
How could people prevent that from happening? Like, just because there are other people saying, like, my favorite joint, don't take away my favorite Italian restaurant. It's on the corner. I don't want it to go. How do I keep it from sticking around or start from going away?
I think that's going to come down to the landlord and the velocity of the returning diner. How quickly does the diner return? if the diner returns and doesn't hide in the suburbs of Stony Creek or Ancaster or, Bimbrook or something, and they end up back downtown and using downtown as the way downtown's supposed to be used as an entertainment facility. When it gets used again as an entertainment facility, that place has a chance to thrive. And that's typically where those places exist.
Well, Joel and I were talking a few months ago now about this kind of dream of a post-commuter world where that maybe out of COVID becomes this world where we don't all spend half our lives in cars going to work in another city anymore. We get to spend more time with our families. And because of that, we also have an extra 2 hours a day when we could be walking downtown to a restaurant and eating together. Now, that sounds like a fantastic theory. Do you think that can become... I mean, do you think that's... If you lose your business trade, do you think it could be made up by a changing kind of family trade, if you like? The people who used to have meals with their colleagues will now have more time to eat on their own, if you like, or eat with their family.
That's possible. I mean, time and sales changed during the pandemic. So, and if you're a Starbucks drive-through or you're the French, they changed for both of them. So at the French, when we typically would, open the door at 11:30, by 12 o'clock, the place was full, every seat for lunch. We couldn't get a table sometimes until 1 o'clock or 1:30 at the French during the pandemic, when you could still dine in, right?
Right.
That part of the pandemic. 3:30, 3 o'clock, peak. Like, that was crazy busy. People drinking and having fun and almost being European, work in the morning and just laugh all afternoon or something. I think that's how the Europeans do it. So, and the Starbucks drive-through, same thing. They couldn't get a car at 8 a.m., but they were packed at 10:30, 11 o'clock.
Right.
It's like people work from home, said, I got to get out of the house. I'm going to go to a drive-through and get a coffee.
Right.
I did it myself. I mean, it was great. It was like I felt like I went somewhere, like, to the stucco place. Mall.
Well, maybe that's what we're talking about, is just kind of a change in lifestyle. Because I know a lot of people are not keen on returning to the office. They rather like, staying at home, working from home. They're seeing their family more often. But I do know that they miss dining out. They miss that. There is something about saying, okay, can I meet you at this place? We'll have lunch together, talk business. And, I just need to get out. And if the idea of I need to get out is I'm going to a restaurant, that's a good thing, isn't it? For the industry, is that, yeah, come on in, get out of the house, have a sandwich, have a beer or whatever. Maybe it's too early to tell that we're changing that those social norms, I guess, of how our workday is supposed to operate.
Yeah, there's cause and effect too, right? Like, I was in a building the other day, the building next to Jackson Square heading east on King. Sorry, heading west on King. It's a tower. It's got an atrium and there's nothing in it at all. It's empty. It's vacant. It's all commercial. Well, if I were that landlord and I couldn't fill that space with workers before the pandemic, and now I definitely am not going to be able to fill that space with workers after the pandemic, why not approach the city and say, you guys have an affordable housing issue right now. Why don't you guys pay me 40, 50 grand a suite? And why don't we convert this commercial to affordable housing? And let's get more people in the core, or geared to income. It doesn't necessarily just have to be like low rent subsidized. There's lots of people who make, 50 grand a year that can't afford housing properly right now, right? Particularly if they're on their own. So why not gear it to income and solve both issues, low income housing and geared to income housing, right?
Jason, stop making sense.
Oh yeah, but we discussed exact ideas. Like here could be potentially your fix for the entire affordable housing problem, in that if we never go from 20% back to anything close to 100% of those people who used to work in offices, that hey, all these empty space can be used now. And what a way to revolutionize downtowns in a different way, and that you just have more people living there who just come right out and want to go to a restaurant because it's on their doorstep. I mean, it seems too good to be true. These kind of, I mean, I imagine these fantastic things all falling into place in 10 minutes. Of course, they probably take years to do. And zoning means that, well, this is a commercial space, so we can't have people living in it.
Fire, this, that.
Yeah.
Well, if they really want to try, they will.
I would love to see. I literally, Joel and I have spoken about it. You've spoken about it now. I have not heard anybody at any level of government talk about it yet, and I would love to hear someone at least put the idea out there. Is this something that could maybe work? Because it seems like an obvious, as these patterns change, we need space. It doesn't matter what the space is used for. If it's not being used for offices, then there's another use we can be putting it to.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, these are all great ideas.
we're out of our pay grade, I guess, on coming up with these ideas here. You know what? I see we're coming up on the 40-minute mark of this conversation, so I think we're just going to wrap it up on there. Jason, thanks for coming on and sharing your experience over the pandemic with us, and I'm hoping that summer of 2021 is the start of the climate out of this mess.
Yeah, I hope to be in a better mood next time I'm on, if you'll have me back.
You're remarkably cheerful given the year you've just been through, I think. So all credit for that.
Yeah, thanks. Appreciate it.
That's it for this episode of the 905er. Thank you for listening. As always, you can send us your feedback, thoughts, and concerns or ideas for future episodes to our email, info@905er.ca. We'd love to hear from you. You can help us keep the 905er going by financially supporting us through Patreon as well as PayPal. Visit us at 905er.ca and click on the support tab. As well, links are in the show notes for your convenience. Lastly, you can find us on social media. Search for _905er on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and LinkedIn. So long for now. See you next time.
Looking to make the most out of this life and optimize your personal wellness? Then check out the Natural Man Podcast. Join me, host Mike C., as we explore all areas of human wellness, physical, mental, and emotional. Learn strategies to optimize your own well-being and be in the driver's seat of your own health. Remember, your doctor works for you. Learn biohacks, neurohacks, ways to improve sleep, and ways to optimize your body and your mind. Check us out on Apple, Spotify, the Fountain app, and at naturalmanpodcast.com.